Hello and welcome to the oddschecker betting show. This finally is the Masters preview. It is the 9th of November. If you told me that at the beginning of the year we'd be previewing the Masters in November, I'd have been pretty confused. But here we are. I'm your host, George Elek, and I'm joined by, as ever for the majors, well, we tried to get them both on when we can, two expert guests. We've got Oddschecker's very own tipster, Niall Lyons. Nice wave from Niall there. Good for the video viewers, not for the podcast listeners. And Dylan Beirne from the 15th Club as well. Cheers, Dylan, for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it. It feels like it's been a long time coming, but we're nearly there.
Exactly. Well, normally when we try and do these, we try and, you guys both fly over from Ireland and from the Northern Ireland, and we try and fit a round of golf in somewhere. This time we're doing it over Skype. Even if we wanted to play golf, we're not allowed to. I think it's fair to say that everybody who likes golf, likes watching golf, likes playing golf, needs this. We need this weekend of our golfing fix. And I am incredibly excited that we're going to be able to settle in for a weekend at Augusta, even if it won't be quite as beautiful as it is in spring. But that's kind of where we're going to start here. And Niall, I'll come to you first, is that this is Augusta as we know it, but this is also Augusta as we don't know it. There won't be, the crowds that we're used to, maybe the pressure. That's going to be probably a cooler climate. They're going to be playing earlier in the day because of both the light and also the college football that's going on, which means that Saturday and Sunday's rounds will finish earlier. How do you kind of put all of that stuff into your thinking about this? Or are you just treating it as a normal Masters, a regulation Augusta 4 days?
Well, in terms of the course, I don't think it'll play too much different than what it does in April. I would say it'd be slightly softer, inevitably, just because of the climate this time of year. Although the weather recently has been quite good in Georgia, although it's due to turn this week and we'll probably see a fair bit of rain throughout the first part of the week anyway. But I think the course will play slightly softer than usual, which means it'll play slightly longer. It always plays as a long course anyway, especially with the way that the fairways are mown from the green to the tee. So it's even a longer golf course than what the yardage suggests. But other than that, as you say, it's a different time of year. We won't see as much colour as what we usually do. The no fans thing is quite interesting. We talked about that.
Patrons, you should say, shouldn't we?
Oh, yes. Yeah, we have to say that, yeah. We talked about it actually in the British Masters, the first podcast we did back a few months ago when the golf returned, whether there would be, a bias towards guys, not performed too well under pressure and found it hard to get over the line. And there's been a few now that have gotten over the line, most notably Koch, I would say, a few weeks ago, who's always found trouble in winning. And now, he gets over the line when there's no fans there. It'll be a strange atmosphere, I would say. You look at the 13th, the 12th and 13th, for example. There's not that on the tee. Yes, there's plenty of patrons on the 12th tee, but when you get up to the green, it's quite eerily quiet, isn't it? And even the 13th green's the same throughout the whole 13th hole. Like, the noise that you hear from the crowd's always, from a long distance away. So I don't think those holes will play any different really, and it'll be more or less the same. But it's different, as you say. But I don't think it'll play too much different than what we normally see in April.
Yeah, certainly maybe 15, 16, the two you maybe associate with kind of the bigger galleries behind the green, possibly. But, maybe that eeriness will also play into different kind of nerves. Dylan, for those who haven't listened to the podcast before or haven't heard your stuff, can you briefly explain what the 15th Club do and what your role is as well?
Yeah, so we kind of use, I suppose in summary, we use data in golf to do whatever we need to do. So that can be anything from working directly with players to help them strategize around the course, a course like Augusta or wherever, helping them maybe pick their schedules or work on their strengths and weaknesses, to things like working with the Ryder Cup team to help make decisions around that. So like picks and pairings and everything else that goes along with it. We work in some media stuff, so you probably see some of our stuff on Sky Sports this week, so when you're watching that. And yeah, so we basically use data in golf to kind of answer questions and try to find some objective answers really. But yeah,
that leads me into it, because we are going to ask you to find us some answers around this weekend using the data, and I guess kind of the same question to you as opposed to Niall, in terms of, in your research, in the work that you're doing, are you making any changes to account for the different circumstances that we find ourselves in going into the weekend?
Not really, no. We probably would if we could, but because there's, as I said, it's kind of an unknown. I think, we've had a look at some of like the weather forecasts and the average temperatures and different things like that, and it broadly seems, quite similar. I think that was part of the reason it is this time of year, is that they tried to get a time of year that was obviously suited, but it was as similar as possible to the normal kind of time as well. But yeah, I mean, the only thing I saw is similar to what Niall said. It might be a little bit softer and play a small little bit longer than it normally would. But beyond that, it's hard to kind of get any definitive answers, because, yeah, like I said, there's just nothing to base it on really.
You're a good follow on Twitter, I must say, for any golf fan. And the last kind of day or so, you posted some very interesting kind of graphs and kind of database graphs, effectively. I don't know if there are any other kind of graph, but it's and I guess it was kind of not myth busting, but in a way looking at some of the common narratives around the Masters, such as, you want somebody who's got good form there, or you want somebody who's played there X amount of times and stuff. And it was interesting to note that there maybe isn't as much of a correlation on that kind of stuff as people would think. So can you kind of talk us through what you found looking at more general Masters trends?
Yeah, so probably I would say the most interesting one in terms of like myth busting maybe is the course history one. So I sort of assume, like most courses, it's overplayed a little bit, but people generally think if you play well at Augusta previously, you'll play well again. And there's obviously players who, Tiger, Spieth, Fred Couples, there's the old classics that everyone kind of seems to think will always play well there. So there is a certain amount of effect, but it's very, very small. Somebody like Spieth, who has overperformed by I think about 2 strokes on average. So he's basically played in every round he's played, he's been 2 strokes better than like a model would suggest he should be. So for somebody like that, who has historically been incredibly good, that translates to like about 10%. So he might be expected to be like 0.2 strokes better than average going forward. So there's very little kind of carryover in terms of what he's done. So there's that. Then there's, I think, yeah, obviously haven't played there before. So the thing about, rookies struggling there and getting to know your way around, that does seem to have an effect as well, but it's maybe not huge. It's kind of in a similar order. So it would be, I think it's like minus 0.23 strokes. So for somebody like Morikawa, basically, it's probably going to cost him about a stroke over the course of a week. And then on the flip side, if you played there, I think it peaks at around 40 rounds or 41 rounds. So right around where DJ and Rory are at the minute.
Rory's 43, I think you said, didn't you?
Yeah, so he's actually going to gain about the same. So relative to their expectation, Rory's probably going to pick up a couple of shots on Morikawa just based on the experience of the course, really. So that's kind of, yeah, they're two of the findings. And then the other one, probably the other interesting one, was around driving distance. So obviously it's pretty topical at the minute. But yeah, a player's ability and a player's driving distance does seem to have a positive effect on their their expected score around Augusta. So there's obviously the benefit of hitting it long gains you strokes on the field, but this seems to be an added bonus on top of that it gains you more than it would on average, let's say. So yeah, it should be interesting to see how that plays out.
So you want to basically find somebody who's not necessarily a rookie, who's played there a few times and hits the ball long. If only there are a few golfers who fit into that category. You're pretty much talking about like the top 20 in the market there, I think. But one possibly in particular, who I think we're about to discuss with Niall in a second. But before we get into the picks, just going to point all the listeners and all the viewers in the direction of the oddschecker app. It's the very best place to find all the best prices, the best bookie offers, the best place terms, which is essential for the Masters. Looking right now, you've got everything ranging from, I think, 5th and 6 places to a 5th and 11 places across our bookmaker partners. So important to do that. And of course, the best tipsters across sport, including Niall. And Niall, you put your tips, your column went live this morning. And there's a 5, we'll get into the others soon, but there's a 5-point headline tip. Those who are watching may have seen a sign over your shoulder, which may be a bit of a giveaway. But at best price, 8-1, Bryson DeChambeau, the nap.
Yeah, and I'm happy to go win only as well, just because there's a possibility that it's win or bust with Bryson in terms of Augusta this time around. But there's no, as I wrote in the preview, there's no value in the price. You know what I mean? I'm backing and tipping him on the basis that I think he's the most likely winner, and not only that, he has the potential to dominate the week, which I don't think many others. I don't think the difference between DJ's best and Ram's best at the minute is. I think there's a fair gap between Bryson's best and their best at the minute. Well, that's not to say that Bryson will produce his best or even needs to be fair, this week. But nevertheless, everything points towards a massive performance. The price is short, but I think what he can gain off the tee is one big talking point. Obviously, he can fly lines that some others may not be able to. But in terms of approaching the green, and we've talked about this over the last couple of years previewing the Masters, it's a very important stat, approaching the green and not missing too many greens, greens in regulation. I think if he drives the ball well, which gives him so much of an advantage on the field as it is, that when he hits those fairways, the opportunities there's just going to be so many opportunities, even on the tough par fours. The slight worry for me would be the par threes, because it's the same level, it's the same playing field basically. When he tees it up on the par three, he doesn't have any much of a length advantage anyway. Maybe going in with a shorter club, but it's not that big of a deal. I think his ball flight is hugely important as well. He hits it so high. The distance, the apex stats that I've been looking at, I think he ranked. Where did he rank in that stat?
Pretty well, I'm guessing.
second last season in 2020, and second in par four scoring as well, which is another stat I'm looking to. So everything points towards a huge performance for me, and there's just not many negatives. He putts quite well these days, and people are saying that he could struggle on the greens, but we've seen so many average putters really win this event down the years. It's not a huge it's not of huge importance to me, and plus I've seen it with my own eyes that he's a very, very decent putter around these times. And even in the 2020 season, he finished first in putting from 5 to 10 feet, which is huge around Augusta, keeping the scores going on the par fives, holding them 7-8 foot birdie putts that you'll be left in some of the par fives, and obviously the occasional par putts. So there's just not many negatives for me. And although the price may not excite many, he's the one for me. And we've seen it at the US Open a month or two ago that his approach was under extreme scrutiny before going. And again, there's a fair amount of negativity regarding what he's going to do. And as I wrote in the preview too, there will be a tipping point at some stage for the length conversation in the game, in which something has to be done, whether it's the club's ball or course design. There will come a tipping point, and this is most likely to be the week where it happens.
I mean, for those who've been kind of living under a rock with Bryson DeChambeau and only come out for the Masters, he won the US Open. He's obviously been brilliant since he bulked up and put the muscle on. There's talk about him in terms of his practice rounds and stuff, hitting, knocking 3-woods over the back of 400-yard par fours, hitting, having wedges into 15 and into 13 as well. I mean, you say it's not all about the price, but is there a chance that if he is going to blitz the course like that, then actually 8-to-1's a massive price because he could be a lot shorter than that if he can. If the stroke advantage he gains from those kind of distances has that big an impact.
Yeah, there's part of that in the reason that I'm backing him, because the capability is there to win the event quite comfortably, which you might say all them favourites have the capability of winning that, but right now his best is not equivalent to Tiger's best back in the day, but Tiger had the ability to go and win an event by 5 or 6 shots.
Yeah.
Bryson done that at the US Open, and there's arguably even more of an advantage here at Augusta. Well, that's my view on how it could potentially play out, but yeah, it's part of the story. Yes, that there would be a readdress of his price should he start well. But he birdies the par 5 second on day one, maybe even birdies the first. He goes a couple under through a handful of holes, and you're talking 7-2, 4-1 already. And then there's the option to look at other markets too, where some bookmakers will price him up to win by 2, 3, 4 plus shots, or to lead after the first round and win the event, or lead after every round. It's one. He's possibly the only one in the field, I think, this week that could do something like that, and it's worth probably looking at.
Dylan, I'm going to ask you in a second what you make of Bryson before we ask you for your best bet. But just, it was a thought of mine, and the reason why you're backing him win only, Niall, is that there is this chance that he could do something spectacular. And so I had a look at the first round leader market, and he's double the price, 16-1. And you have to think that if the reasoning behind this is that he could be X amount of shots better than the field because of what he's gaining, that could be another way to play it, where you're hoping that margin of superiority plays out immediately.
Yeah, exactly. I don't disagree with that at all. And even when he was an amateur, I think he was 6 under through 17 holes or something on his first appearance there, and he was set to be the first round leader that day as well, and made a complete hames of the 18th that day. So, and
I think he was T1 after round 1 in 2019 as well, if I'm not mistaken. Which I watched at 15th Club HQ with a few free beers. Good lads they are. But Dylan, coming to you now. Before we ask you for your kind of headline tip for the weekend, what have you got to say? We're not even going to give Niall right of reply here, so you can say whatever you like.
Yeah, I'm a bit nervous about the negative comments forbidden on Bryson. I do have quite a different opinion on it. For me, I actually don't see, and I've spent quite a bit of time looking at this over the last week or so. I don't see how we really should be favoured based on what we've seen, which is going to be a controversial opinion, I think. But
for those listening and not watching, Niall's face is, yeah. Carry on.
Yeah, so for me, fundamentally, and probably something that, because of the way I look at it in terms of purely based on kind of things that I can back up in terms of numbers, probably what gets lost a lot in majors is people look for other angles in terms of some of the stuff I talked about, so course history and how many times they played course or whatever. And fundamentally, what gets lost sometimes is how good a player is, and how good based on what we've seen from them. So now I don't know what's going on with Bryson right now, this week at Augusta, and I don't know what he's been doing the last few weeks, obviously, but based on what we've seen from him over the last couple of years and since the restart, he's not the best player in the world. He's barely in the top 5 since the restart, and that's counting in an exceptional performance at the US Open, but we see exceptional performances semi-regularly. That happens. And for me, Justin Johnson is the best player in the world.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that in the slightest, but I do think that his best is better than other people's, the other golfers' best at the minute. Obviously, they're not going to produce it every week. Neither's Bryson, but I do think his best is better than the rest at the minute.
Oh yeah. If he plays out of his skin, but I wouldn't back him based on that. I wouldn't back him based on his best being better than everyone else, because DJ over the past however many 10 years. There's probably an argument that his best is better than everybody else. And given the form that he's in, if you look at some of the performances DJ put up, that one in WGC, I think it was Mexico maybe last year, where he blew away an incredibly strong field, that's that's as good a performance as I've seen, and it's there. I actually haven't looked at the whose peak is better right now, but yeah, I mean in terms of
I agree with it. It's close anyway. Like between the two at the minute, DJ's playing out of his skin. To be fair, I'll probably be having a few quid in him as a saver anyway. But
yeah. So, but for me. Yeah, for me, DJ, I would have DJ as actually a pretty clear favourite this week. And last Friday I was looking at the prices. DJ was 12-1, Bryson was like 8-1, and for me, I would have actually been flipping those prices. And that's I'm actually gone a little bit better on DJ now after his performances this week, or this week gone. So yeah, for me, like in terms of Bryson specifically. He will get an advantage. There's no question that I touched on already. The distance is more of an advantage at Augusta than it is around other courses. But there's maybe a little bit as well. I had a look at what that actually means. So, if you're DJ and you're on a par 5 and you're hitting a 340-yard drive and you're leaving, let's say, 200 yards to the pin, and then Bryson goes and hits a 370, 380 drive. He's leaving 160. The steepness of the curve at that, in terms of strokes to the hole, in those difference, in the 40-yard difference there is not actually that high, because you're not in a range where if it was the difference between having 20 yards and 60 yards, it's a much bigger gap than 160 to 200, because it just doesn't dip that much. So like it might be, let's say,
I think it's the long par 4s though that could make a difference in that regard. Do you honest think no?
No, not so much. No, because he'd have to be gaining a huge amount for him to, because he's gaining like a stroke and a half off the tee, and that's contributing massively to the fact that he's 5th best in the world. Unless we're double counting that value, if that makes sense, like unless you're going to significantly gain more than that, he's not actually getting better, if that makes sense. He needs to do that to maintain his level at fifth in the world. Whereas for him to go from his previous performances recently, where he's 5th, for him to jump up to 1st or 2nd, that distance would need to be worth probably twice what it is at other courses, which I just don't think it is at the Masters.
Yeah, you're saying 5th in the world, but he's only been doing this for 7 or 8 months. And not even really consistently yet. There's a possibility that you could go mega consistent from here on.
I think as the referee here, I'm gonna have to step in at some stage, because we can't talk about Bryson for the whole podcast. We're already half an hour through. But that's what I said. You guys can take it up with each other off air afterwards. And if anybody wants to kind of ask either of these guys some more questions about Bryson or any other matters, I'm sure if you tweet them, they'll be quick to get back to you. Sorry to drop you in that one. But Dylan, so you mentioned DJ there. Before I ask you, I'll just run through the prices, because DJ is now 2nd favourite. He's been clipped into 9-1 now after his decent performance in Houston over the weekend. John Rahm is 11-1. Justin Thomas is 12-1. Rory Mcilroy 14-1. Xander Schauffele 14-1. Brooks Koepka 16-1. Patrick Cantlay 25. Patrick Reed 28. Till Hatton 28. And then 2 players in Hideki Matsuyama and Tony Finau that Niall has put in his column as well. Next up at 30s and 33s, Bubba Watson and Colin Morikawa the same price. Have I mentioned your best bet, Dylan? Is he in there, or is it someone further down?
I'm still going to say best bet for the week is actually DJ. Even at the price, I think, what is he now? 9-1, 10-1?
9-1, yeah.
Yeah, I think 9-1. If you can get 10 or 11 places in that, I still think there's very decent value in that. I think Schauffele as well actually is probably somebody that's, because there's so much talk about a few others. I think he's, as he tends to do for some reason, he's flying under the radar a little bit. So I think 14s or whatever it is there, 10 places on him. I think I've got him about 12-1 priced up at. So I think one of those two, definitely at the top end, they'd be the top 2 picks for me. But yeah, it's going to be really interesting. Like I think the whole, not to go back into the pricing thing, but I think it's going to be fascinating. Like I really can't wait to see how it plays out. But in terms of picks, I think number 1 would still be DJ for me. Yeah.
DJ 9-1, Zander 14-1. I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned. We'll come back to talking about Rahm, Thomas, and McIlroy, but you mentioned somebody kind of coming in quietly and how that's kind of always Schauffele's way. It feels to me like the person who seems to be a little bit under the radar this year is Brooks Koepka, who, you know, for about 3 years was basically anybody who, anybody betting in majors would tell you that his major record was so good, and the consistency of his golf away. I mean, we've spoken before on this, Dylan, and you basically said that his level of golf throughout the year doesn't put him near his place in the market normally for majors. But then that isn't necessarily to say that he's not value when it comes to this. He comes off the back of a decent weekend in Houston. There's an interesting dynamic in terms of his relationship with Bryson DeChambeau as well that I think could be quite lively over the weekend. Niall, I'll ask you what you think of Brooks, because as you can probably tell, he's the player that I've backed so far. So this is your chance to tell me where I've gone wrong.
It's a tough one to judge. Obviously, down the years, we've had the same conversation around plenty of major championships, I would say. He wouldn't be for me simply because I know he played very well last year, but I don't think Augusta plays to his strengths as well as other Open Championship venues would. US Open Championship venue would play to his strength. Just don't think he gains that much of an advantage over his, over the other 5 or 6 around him in the market that makes him such a bet at these places. It's different when you're going to a tough US Open where, the way he scores can just, obliterate a field. But I don't see that happening at Augusta. And he played well last week, which is a huge positive. But I think he was 29th, just inside the top 30 in the PGA, and then didn't play the US Open. It's just, I don't think it's just.
But he had a shocking Sunday, didn't he, in the US PGA? He was up in the top 5 and then shot like an 80 on the Sunday.
Yeah, which can be forgiven because it's only one round, But I just don't think the preparation's been ideal all year, and he hasn't convinced me that he's in the sort of form that'll win a major championship.
Good, that's me told. Jon Rahm, Justin Thomas, and Rory McIlroy. Dylan, let's come to you first on those 3. Take your pick. Rahm, a popular one, looking to get his first major. Justin Thomas, somebody whose Augusta record isn't great, and then Rory McIlroy, somebody who we can expect to probably be there or thereabouts, but come Sunday, who knows?
Yeah. So like for my kind of prices this year, I've incorporated a couple of things in terms of what I talked about, the course fit and the amount of times they've actually played there before. Adding those in, of those 3 are at the top end, obviously, and JT is the shortest price for me of those 3. The course, everybody knows the approach plays is always key around Augusta, and he's year in, year out, he's topping or in the top 2 or 3 in that stat. So I think the fact that he maybe hasn't played all that well there before isn't, like I said earlier, it's not a huge concern, because I wouldn't really give too much weight to previous performance, be it really good previous performance or really bad previous performance. So yeah, for me, the ranking of those 3 is JT first, then Rory, then Jon Rahm. And I think the main reason for Rory being ahead of Jon Rahm is probably the experience thing, because Rahm doesn't have that many rounds there. He's probably still on the kind of upward part of that curve, whereas Rory's right at the top of it. So I don't think there's much between those. Rahm's actually probably slightly better in terms of performance, but I think just specifically at Augusta, Rory's probably a slightly better player at the minute.
Anything to add or counter that with, Niall?
Yeah, Rahm would have been my third on the market, third favourite, to be fair. I think he's played well at Augusta over the last couple of years and seems to be getting better at it. Maybe just not quite ready or something to win him. Like, I was disappointed with some of his efforts earlier in the year, and he's obviously had some unbelievable performances too, which could happen. But I think maybe he could suit a tougher layout, if anything. Who knows? It could be this week that it plays really tough. As you say, it's a bit of an unknown. But like I think Rory McIlroy is coming in slightly under the radar, and it'll probably suit him. Every year there's been talk about the Grand Slam, whether he's going to get the green jacket, and there just hasn't been as much coverage around that lately. And what you mentioned at the start of the podcast there about the rounds finishing early on Saturday and Sunday, not quite under the same amount of heat and pressure. There could be slight variances there. You know, when you look to Sunday evening where he hasn't really performed in the past, that could be different this year. I think what's key for him is to get off to a fast start, and maybe if he does get off to a fast start, he's one to maybe look at in the market. I think at the Masters you always need a fast start. It's not really a course where you can make up a lot of ground. You want to be towards the top of the leaderboard at the very start, and when McIlroy does that and he's at the top, you know, he seems to usually go well from then on.
It's interesting that you mentioned about the career slam, because although I wouldn't normally back Rory at 14s, I backed him for Sports Personality of the Year at 100s, thinking that if he wins this, you know, he's no way he's a 5-1 shot to win Spotty. So there you go. That's a nice.
There's not that many runners in that apart.
No.
So you could be onto something there.
There you go. I mean, I won't say who I backed with because they won't be thanking me, but I think that might be a bit of an old price. But no, your other tips, you know, anybody who's listening, I recommend should read Niall's write-up, even if you want to make your own selections. It's still full of kind of wisdom in there to help you make your picks. I mentioned Tony Finau and Hideki Matsuyama, who are the next two, and then Cameron Smith and Jason Kokrak as well. So why don't you just talk us through the thinking behind those four to supplement Bryson?
Yeah, I really like Finau, especially for an each-way bet. I think he's probably the best each-way bet in the field with the place terms available. Last season finished 14th in par 4 scoring, 21st in the distance to the APAC stat that I've been looking at. And his record in major championships is just absolutely phenomenal. This year, 4th at the PGA and 8th at the US Open. So that's 8 top 10s in 17 major starts. That's an unbelievable record, 3 missed cuts in there. And he's been so consistent lately over the last couple of months, barely outside the top 20. And I just think it's a matter of time before he realizes that potential. You know, people get caught up in not getting over the line in a couple of events, but he's far from a bottler. He hasn't shown that yet anyway. And he's lost in a playoff, obviously, in the WGC. 4 top 10s in the last 6 majors is right up there with the best in the game. So around the 33-1 mark, or 30 to 35-1, I think he's a cracking each way bet. I'll just run through the other two. I was impressed by Hideki Matsuyama last week at Houston, and I've kind of been impressed with him over the last couple of months. As I stated in the preview, I've always been scratching my head at the prices he's been going off. I don't think, his golf has really warranted those kind of prices, and he stayed around that price every single year for every single year, practically, no matter what his form. And he hasn't won in over 3 years. But he sits well in the stats that I've been looking at. And he was 22nd in the PGA and 17th at the US Open. There's 2 top 25s there in the last 2 majors. A positive sign going into the next one. One thing worth noting, maybe, the media circus that travels around with him. The golfers from the Far East are plagued with that wherever they go. So I suspect that'll be a lot less than what it usually is at the Masters for him. So he might find a slight bit of peace, and you never know, it could be the difference. He gained over 4 strokes putting last week, which is massive for Matt. and his game around the greens has been improving over the last couple of months. There's been a couple of super performances in there, which is not really like him. So I think there's a lot of positives. He stopped that pause in the backswing where he pauses at the very top. It's a lot quicker transition now into the downswing, and I really like his chances this week. Obviously, you need to putt well again. Then 2 outsiders. 1, Cameron Smith. I think his credentials are great. Doesn't quite hit the stats that I would like to this week, but he's inside his top 50 in the world. He's found something recently. 11th at the CJ Cup and 4th at the Zozo are 2 very good performances lately, and that's after kind of going off the boil slightly after winning the Sony earlier on in the year. But he's won 8 events in the trot with positive strokes gained approaching the greens, which is a big positive for Augusta. I was impressed by the way he won at Sony as well. That I think if he gets into the mix this week, I think he could show a lot more than what people might expect. He was in trouble there in the 72nd hole at the Sony. He hit it left of the green, ended up in the tree, had to get a drop. and he got up and down from about 20 yards left of the green hole, about a 10-footer for a par to get into the playoff, and then won the playoff quite impressively. I think he's a decent each way bet. 2 top 5s in major championships before as well, one of them being here at Augusta. So there's not many negatives there for Cam Smith. And finally, Jason Koch, a debutant, who it's an interesting conversation whether I would say the debutants this year will have as big a chance as ever to break that duck, that everyone always talks about. The debutant contingent is absolutely super this year, headed by Morikawa, of course. But Koch obviously won recently. And then he actually finished top 20 in his last start, losing over, I think it was 4.5 strokes approaching the green, which is unbelievable that he still finished in the top 20. And he finished in the top 20 in the US Open previous to going and winning the CJ Cup. I think he has the length off the tee and he has the ball flight. And, he's quite tidy all-round game that, if he goes well, he just might surpass some expectations that, he's never really got into that position before. But, he held off Sander quite impressively there at the CJ Cup. And, if he gets in or around the top of the leaderboard at any stage of the week, he could be a runner.
So there you have Niall's next 4. Just to repeat, you've got Hideki Matsuyama, best price 30-1 now. These have all come in a bit since Niall's preview went live. Tony Finau 33-1. That's with Bet Victor, only 6 places. If you want a few more places, Paddy's and Betfair are both 28-1. Sky Bet 25, they're 10 places and 11 places. Cameron Smith is 80-1 with a few firms, as short as 50s elsewhere. Jason Koch 90-1 with VBet is the best price you're getting for him. So Dylan, over to you now. I mean, there are loads of golfers we haven't mentioned yet, and kind of the nature of this kind of show means we can't talk about everybody, but who have you circled as being ones of interest at the prices?
Yeah, I think I actually had a fair bit of overlap with Niall's picks as well, but of the non-overlapping ones, I quite like Patrick Reed's price. I backed him in a few different markets actually, so that I think the past champion market is potentially one that he could be interested in. I think he's 9-2 in that, and there's I think there's a bit of each way value there because it's not that deep of a market. And in the outright, I think he's a good price there as well. Kokrak, I was a big fan of him. So same as Niall obviously, but yeah, I thought he was a really good price, and even factoring in, the fact that he hasn't, adding a penalty in for having not played, but I think he's a really good price where he is. And then slightly further down, I think I've tipped him at least once or twice before. He's Eric Van Rooyen. I think I'm going to stick with him. I think he's about 150-1.
160 best price, but he is blue. He's blue on oddschecker, so people are backing him.
Yeah. No, I think I know he's been improving a lot over, particularly he's kind of been consistently improving over the last 2.5 years. He's got kind of a skill set that will lend itself to just being successful all over the world and on the PGA Tour. He's really good driver of the ball, solid on approach and around the greens, and a good putter as well. So, I think something like that at those kind of prices, he had a good finish at the PGA last year. He's able to do it in majors. So I think, he would be probably the longest price. There's not an awful lot outside of maybe the top 10 in the market that I'm looking at really, but he'd probably be the longest price that I'd look at this week.
There's a kind of a collection of names between like 33-1 and 66-1 of players who, have either gone well here before and have hit some poor form, or who are kind of, if you spoke to people who maybe don't follow golf so closely, would have amongst the favourites without realising that things aren't going too well. So just kind of run through them. You've got Webb Simpson's 33-1, Tiger's 40, Jason Day 40, Matt Wolff 45, Adam Scott 45, Tommy Fleetwood 50-1, Louis Oosthuizen 55-1, Ricky Fowler 66s, Sergio Garcia 66s, Justin Rose 66s, Jordan Spieth 66s, Matt Fitzpatrick 66s. Of those guys, and both of you just pick up wherever, are there any there that you think could be kind of, I guess, sleepers, guys whose price has been allowed to drift because they're not necessarily in great form, but obviously have the game to challenge this weekend?
Yeah, I think Matt Fitz would probably be the one for me. He'd be the only one I'd back out of that group. I think the fact that they're all such big prices is probably just a reflection of how strong maybe the top 5 or 6 in the market are. So there's just not really room for them. But I think Fitz is 66s or I think at that price he's in kind of sneaky good form. Obviously doesn't hit it that long, but he can still get around, and his putting has been absolute lights out the last 3-4 months or so. So if he has a really hot week with the putter, then he could definitely compete. But he'd probably be the only one of that list that I'd really be interested in,
I think we can, glean from Danny Willett and Jordan Spieth and, even a bit of Paddy Reed that you don't need to hit the ball, miles off the tee here. It obviously is a long golf course, but as Dylan says, you can get around it, especially the par fives where, you can make up the score, that you might lose elsewhere. So, there's a lot of golfers in there at the prices, as you say, and if you took the approach of backing all of them with the places on offer, I'm sure you'd come out level on the week at least, But one or two of them will figure on the leaderboard. Of that, there is no doubt. So at every Masters Championship, there always is. Oosthuizen could be one of them. He went very close at the US Open, the last major, and he hung around on the final day as well, quite impressively. Just Bryson and Wolf got away, but I wouldn't put really many people off backing any of those golfers because with the place terms on offer, because one or two of them will place and you'll end up in positive money for the week.
Well, that brings us to an end with I wouldn't take Niall's advice there too literally by backing the whole field each way, because we might get a few angry phone calls at the end of the week, but certainly some cracking place terms on offer. So do download the oddschecker app and do read Niall's tips as well. Bryson DeChambeau, certainly the headline for Niall, but Dylan maybe pouring a little bit of cold water on that one. So I'll leave it up to you guys to decide who made the better case. But thank you very much to both Niall and to Dylan for their insight here. As I said, recommend massively following them both on Twitter. I'm sure we'll gain some great insight over the weekend. And do have a look at the graphs that Dylan posted yesterday, because they are, they certainly, for me as a golf fan, made me rethink the way I'm approaching this weekend. So thank you guys very much. And thanks to you all for watching or for listening. Do subscribe to our YouTube channel for plenty more of this tipping content across all sports. And most importantly, please do gamble responsibly and please enjoy the Masters.